Hollywood has produced over 10,000 movies, but according to legendary critics Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel, only 23 made it onto their greatest films list. Today, we're going to present that exclusive list to you. So, sit back, relax, and see which of these top 23 masterpieces you might have missed. Number 23. Shoah, 1985. Claude Lanzmann's 9.5-hour documentary on the Holocaust was made when many participants and survivors in that horrific chapter of history were still alive, but in a time before the internet or phone cameras. So, Lanzmann put in an enormous amount of painful, exacting work, tracking down, interviewing, and filming anyone and everyone he could on this subject. The results are, if nothing else, powerful and essential. Siskel called it the greatest use of film I've ever seen. Ebert agreed, and his written review is just as odd. For more than 9 hours, I sat and watched a film named Shoah, and when it was over, I sat for a while longer and simply stared into space, trying to understand my emotions. At the end of the year, Siskel named it the year's best, but Ebert did not include it on his list. Obviously, it belongs at the top of the list, he said, but did not feel right with the year's ordinary films, so he left it off and placed it in a special category. His decision was controversial among listmongers, and it's the reason Shoah places so low on this list. Number 22, House of Games, 1987. Playwright and screenwriter David Mamet made his directorial debut with one of the original twisty thrillers, a tale of con men in which the cons unfold inside of other cons. Lindsay Krause plays a psychiatrist who learns that one of her patients may be in danger over a gambling debt. In a move probably not endorsed by psychiatry school, she goes to the gambler, Joe Mantegna, and asks him to erase the debt. He agrees, but only if she'll help him pull off an elaborate con. Along the way, the audience learns all about conning and lying and tells, told to the rhythm of Mamet's singular dialogue with its punchy, repeating chunks. Ebert wrote that, "This movie is alive," but years later admitted that he loved it because it seemed so fresh upon its initial release. Today's movie fans may be able to spot the twists early on, but in its day House of Games was a brainy treat. Number 21. Hannah and Her Sisters, 1986. Woody Allen was on a roll when he made this great New York comedy drama about a handful of characters connected to 3 sisters, cooking up with so many great characters, performances, situations, and dialogue. Allen plays an ex-husband who searches for meaning in life through religion. In one scene, he brings home a cross and a loaf of Wonder Bread. Michael Caine, as the married intellectual who is married to one sister but falls for another, and Diane Wiest as the kooky, single third sister, both won Oscars. Allen's brilliant novelistic screenplay, which takes place over a year's time, starting and ending at Thanksgiving, won a 3rd Oscar. Siskel said that it's the most life-affirming film that Woody Allen has done since Annie Hall. This is the work of a happy filmmaker, and one of the greatest that this country has produced. Ebert agreed, adding that it was the best movie Allen ever made. Number 20. The Color Purple, 1985. It's hard to imagine a time when Steven Spielberg was struggling to be taken seriously. But if you'd made some of the top box office attractions, roller coaster-like rides and movies for younger viewers, then you'd find it hard to be considered a grown-up filmmaker as well. In recent years, Spielberg has managed that nicely, but The Color Purple was his first attempt. Adapted from an acclaimed Alice Walker novel, the film takes some tough material and makes it both sweet and heartbreaking. The movie was famous for being one of the most nominated films at the Oscars without winning a single thing. It's also famous for Spielberg's Best Director snub, although he was dropped to allow in Akira Kurosawa for Ran, so it was a fair trade. In his Sun-Times review, Ebert wrote, "The Color Purple is not the story of her suffering, but of her victory. And by the end of her story, this film had moved me and lifted me up as few films have. It is a great, warm, hard, unforgiving, triumphant movie, and there is not a scene that does not shine with the love of the people who made it." Number 19. The Emigrants, 1971, and The New Land, 1972. This two-parter was a giant-sized Swedish epic, running over 6 hours, released in U.S. theaters in 1973, although it has been largely absent from home video for a generation. It was based on a set of 4 novels by Vilhelm Moberg, and, as the title suggests, depicts the trials and tribulations of a Swedish family as they journey from Sweden to the United States. It was directed by Jan Troell, a filmmaker that had been endorsed by none other than Ingmar Bergman. Despite its length and subject matter, and subtitles, it was a success and received universal acclaim and many Oscar nominations. Siskel and Ebert hadn't begun their TV show yet, and writing for competing papers, they each selected the films together as a major benchmark of the year. In 1979, on a special episode of the show, Siskel mentioned the films as among the best of the decade. Number 18, Claire's Knee, 1971. The French director Eric Romer was a film critic for Cahiers du Cinéma in the 1950s, and a colleague of François Truffaut, Jean-Luc Godard, and the others. While they began making films in the early 1960s and creating the French New Wave, Romer was something of a late bloomer, not finding his stride until the late 1960s and early 1970s. With films like Claire's Knee, he specialized in relaxed, summary films about romance among intelligent people, and their intellectual attempts to try and understand romance and all its strange nuances. In the movie, an older man on the verge of marrying becomes entranced by a young woman and entertains a notion to caress her knee. His writer friend encourages his behavior, looking for fodder for her writing, and, in fact, the film plays out in novelistic chapters. Claire's Knee is a movie for people who still read good novels, care about good films, and think occasionally, wrote Ebert. Number 17, Terms of Endearment, 1983. James L. Brooks exploded right out of a television career to make this feature directorial debut, based on Larry McMurtry's novel. Like Woody Allen's Hannah and Her Sisters, it's a deft mix of comedy and drama, with strong characters and dialogue that slip effortlessly back and forth between funny and painful. The performances are all terrific. Shirley MacLaine and Jack Nicholson won Oscars, and Deborah Winger and John Lithgow received nominations. Siskel wrote, "The goal is, I suspect, to reflect life with all of its energy, missed opportunities, warmth, cruelty, joy, and bad luck. It's a very good movie, if a tad overpraised. Yet, perhaps in part because of Siskel and Ebert, or perhaps because of a subplot involving cancer that switched it from a mere character study to an important film, Terms of Endearment went on to win the Oscars for Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Screenplay." Number 16, MASH, 1970. At the age of 45, having been working in the picture business for well over a decade, director Robert Altman struck it big with MASH, 1970, which continued the irreverent personal qualities that made Easy Rider a hit the previous year and helped kick off a decade full of interesting works. Donald Sutherland, Elliot Gould, and Tom Skerritt star as army doctors in the Korean War, who resort to humor and jokes to help deal with the hellish futility of the war itself. Sally Kellerman is Hot Lips O'Houlihan, one of their targets, and Robert Duvall is the upright major. Frank Burns, Altman's style, which incorporated wide shots, random zoom-ins, and a collage of overlapping sounds, was incredibly fresh and daring, and helped the movie seem like more than just a routine slapstick comedy. Siskel wrote, "For me, MASH contains as much depression as humor," and Ebert said, "One of the reasons MASH is so funny is that it's so desperate. Gould and Sutherland and the members of their merry band of pranksters are offended because the Army regulars don't feel deeply enough." The movie won an Oscar for its screenplay by Ring Lardner Jr. and received nominations for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Editing, and Best Supporting Actress, Kellerman. Number 15, Last Tango in Paris, 1972. Pauline Kael's review of Last Tango in Paris is the most famous one, wherein the famously cranky critic proclaimed it a landmark in cinema history. But Siskel and Ebert were not immune to its power either. Ebert called it one of the great emotional experiences of our time. Bernardo Bertolucci was a young upstart ready to take the world by storm, and star Marlon Brando had just been in the powerhouse The Godfather. The movie seemed entirely new, frankly sexual and dramatically daring. It told the story of a middle-aged American widower in Paris who wanders into an apartment for rent at the same time as a 20-year-old Jean, Maria Schneider. They have sex and agree to keep coming back for more sex, but anonymously and no names. Cale predicted that it would usher in a new era of adult sexuality in movies, but instead, viewers tittered uncomfortably about lines like, "Get the butter." It did receive Oscar nominations for Bertolucci and Brando. In the years before the show, Siskel and Ebert rated it highly in their respective newspapers, and then later, on their Best of the 1970s show, mentioned it again. Number 14. One False Move, 1992. As a testament to their sheer critical power, Siskel and Ebert rescued several movies over their careers, and this was one of the best ones. Surely One False Move would have been doomed to sit on video shelves unwatched if not for our boys on TV. It was not a huge hit, but it had a decent run in theaters. Director Carl Franklin had been an actor on television and a director in Roger Corman's camp, and co-writer and co-star Billy Bob Thornton had been an actor in random projects of varying quality. Together, they teamed up, along with Thornton's co-writer Tom Epperson, to create this mature, intelligent, suspenseful, dramatic crime film. It tells the story of three criminals on the run: Thornton, Cinda Williams, and Michael Beach, and a cop on their trail, Bill Paxton, but goes much deeper than that cursory outline. Ebert said, "No words of praise can quite reflect the seductive strength of One False Move." Number 13. Amadeus, 1984. Milos Forman's adaptation of Peter Shaffer's play could have been a stuffy movie about costumes and classical music, or a routine biopic with the usual Cliff's Notes treatment. But instead, it's a vibrant, sexy, funny, and passionate. It's a movie that really understands artistry. It knows how to make Salieri's music sound ordinary and Mozart's extraordinary. It knows how to depict Salieri's jealous suffering and Mozart's giggly joy. Siskel wrote that the movie treats the subject of creativity in a fresh way. Mozart creates easily and gloriously, and his genius is presented here refreshingly as a gift from God. It's as simple and as awe-inspiring as that. 1984 was a big year for serious movies that were awarded, as well as for great comedies that were not awarded, and Amadeus was the refreshing bridge between the two. It was an Oscar juggernaut, receiving 11 nominations and winning 8. F. Murray Abraham as Salieri and Tom Hulce as Mozart competed against one another for Best Actor, and Abraham, the older of the two, won. Otherwise, it won Best Picture, Director, Screenplay, Art Direction, Costume Design, Sound, and Makeup. It lost cinematography and editing to The Killing Fields. Number 12, My Dinner with Andre, 1981. My Dinner with Andre is perhaps the most famous example of a movie that Siskel and Ebert rescued from obscurity. Directed by Louis Malle and written by and starring Andre Gregory and Wallace Shawn, the movie very simply shows two men meeting and talking over dinner. Gregory has been around the world exploring life and its connections with theater, and he tells some magnificent stories, so powerful that they're almost visual, and then Shawn responds in his own way. Even if it wasn't a box office smash or an Oscar winner, the movie at least became famous enough to be parodied. Siskel wrote, "With its colorful language, My Dinner with Andre is to overproduced Hollywood films what radio is to television. Our minds supply the pictures." Ebert said, "They are alive on the screen, breathing, pulsing, reminding us of endless, impassioned conversations we've had, with those few friends worth talking with for hours and hours." The movie is now over 30 years old, but it hasn't lost any of its power. Number 11, Crumb, 1995. Terry Zwiegoff's Crumb, 1995, may be the greatest documentary ever made about a living person. With incredible patience and fearlessness, Zwiegoff explores the way that the three Crumb brothers, the famous Robert Crumb, as well as the equally fascinating Charles and Maxon, used art and comics as a necessary outlet, a channeling of their most disturbed fears and desires. Distributors wanted Charles cut out of the finished film, but he provides an essential perspective into the Robert Crumb story. The movie wonders at the strange family dynamic that could have resulted in such artistry, and goes forward to look at Robert's children. Zwiegoff also films comics and the creation of comics in close-up, sustained, so that they can be savored. Siskel predicted, in the spring of 1995, that he would not see a better movie for the rest of the year, and Ebert agreed. Siskel did choose it as the year's best, but Ebert was slightly more impressed by Leaving Las Vegas and dropped it to number 2. Ebert later wrote, as part of his great film series, "We leave the film convinced there are no secrets still concealed in this family." Number 10, Zed, 1969. In Ebert's third year as a critic and Siskel's first, a year in which they might not have even spoken to each other yet, they both chose Costa Gavras' Zed as the year's best film. Apparently, neither had their eye on what might be a lasting achievement, but rather chose the most incendiary movie of the moment. It was based on a then-recent event, the attempted assassination of a left-wing deputy, Yves Montand, by the right-wing military government and the subsequent investigation by the examining magistrate, Jean-Louis Trintignant. The movie opens with an audacious scene, a lecture on mold and mildew that actually pertains to the left, and goes on with a complex array of lithe cinematography and editing. Siskel said, "It is a great film for many reasons, not the least of which is that it can be enjoyed as a political thriller as well as a political statement," while Ebert agreed, "Z is at the same time a political cry of rage and a brilliant suspense thriller." Number 9, Nashville, 1975. Robert Altman scored again in 1975, and although Nashville wasn't quite the hit that Mia's H was, it was considered an even greater film, a portrait of America itself. Some 25 actors had speaking parts, and the ones who played musicians were encouraged to write their own songs, in character. Keith Carradine's song, "I'm Easy," won the movie's only Oscar. Woven together like a tapestry, the movie tackled themes of music, business, politics, and love in ways that were beautiful, funny, shocking, and moving. Siskel and Ebert were still a few months away from beginning their show, but from their competing newspaper offices, they agreed once again. Ebert called it the best American film since Bonnie and Clyde. Number 8. Do the Right Thing, 1989. It may be hard to remember how incendiary Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing was when it opened, sparking fears of violence in movie theaters across the country. It's therefore important to remember how brave Siskel and Ebert were for praising it, diffusing fear and paranoia, and encouraging people to see it. It's a glorious film, vibrant, kinetic, and very funny, as well as complex and thoughtful. It features a host of memorable characters played by Spike Lee, Rosie Perez, Danny Aiello, John Turturro, Giancarlo Esposito, Bill Nunn, Ossie Davis, Ruby Dee, Samuel L. Jackson, Richard Edson, and many others, not to mention the great soundtrack and a powerful theme song by Public Enemy. Years later, Ebert wrote, "Spike Lee had done an almost impossible thing. He'd made a movie about race in America that empathized with all the participants. He didn't draw lines or take sides, but simply looked with sadness at one racial flashpoint that stood for many others." The Academy made one of its most shameful moves that year, nominating Do the Right Thing for only 2 Oscars, Best Supporting Actor and Best Screenplay. It lost both, while the pleasantly non-threatening racial story, Driving Miss Daisy, won Best Picture. Number 7. The Right Stuff, 1983. One of the last great American epics, Philip Kaufman's The Right Stuff, based on the book by Tom Wolfe, told the story of the rise of the space program, from breaking the sound barrier to the race into space. Kaufman's brilliant touch was to make it simultaneously a celebration of American gumption as well as a satire. Viewers could thrill to an exhilarating flight while at the same time asking, "What's really going on here?" The great cast included Sam Shepard, Scott Glenn, Ed Harris, Dennis Quaid, Fred Ward, and Barbara Hershey. Despite Siskel and Ebert's enthusiastic praise, the movie was a flop, with audiences far preferring to see a pure fantasy like Return of the Jedi. The Right Stuff still received a generous number of Oscar nominations, and it won 4, but it lost the major categories to Terms of Endearment. In the Tribune, Siskel complained that publicity over astronaut John Glenn's real-life bid for the presidency threatened to dwarf the film, calling it possibly the least interesting aspect of The Right Stuff, a great American movie. Number 6, Schindler's List, 1993. Even if Steven Spielberg's early attempts to become an adult filmmaker didn't quite work, there's very little question that Schindler's List did. Shot in black and white with bits of color, it tells the story of the Holocaust through a pair of exceedingly complex characters, Oskar Schindler, Liam Neeson, who begins with a war profiteering scheme and winds up saving the lives of over 1,000 Jews, and Eamon Gurth, Ralph Fiennes, an evil Nazi who, every so often, struggles to reaffirm his beliefs. Aside from a few easily forgiven missteps, Spielberg's direction is incredibly intuitive, providing little rest breaks, victories, and even some subtle humor as rewards for viewers who sit through the brutal, harsh moments. Number 5, Fargo, 1996. It was the 6th film by Joel and Ethan Coen, but Fargo, 1996, was the first time Siskel and Ebert really went crazy about their work. A great American movie, Siskel said. He predicted in early spring that he wouldn't see a better movie for the rest of the year, and he didn't. Fargo may feel like a typical and lightweight comic crime movie, a very popular genre in the 1990s, but it's full of unique touches, from the rhythm of the language to the seemingly throwaway moments that reveal so much about the characters and their inner lives. Even the snowy cinematography is note perfect. It won 2 Oscars, for Frances McDormand's lead performance and for Best Original Screenplay. It lost many others to The English Patient, and William H. Macy lost Best Supporting Actor to Cuba Gooding Jr. Ebert selected it as the number 4 best movie of the decade, though it should be noted that Siskel died in 1998, before he could compile his own list for the 1990s. Number 4, Goodfellas, 1990. At the end of 1989, Martin Scorsese's Raging Bull was overwhelmingly voted the best movie of the decade, not just by Siskel and Ebert, but by many other critics. Just a few months later, Scorsese, De Niro, and Pesci released a new movie, Goodfellas, 1990. It was a different kind of movie, not as gritty as the earlier films, but with a new kind of movement, a slick, exciting pace. Many of its moments, including the use of Layla and the final coke-fueled helicopter paranoia sequence, have entered the lexicon of filmmaking. Pesci won an Oscar for his performance. You think I'm funny? But though the movie was universally acclaimed, the Academy preferred Dances with Wolves for the majority of the other awards, perhaps because of the criminal nature of the characters. On the show, Ebert said, "It ranks with The Godfather in its portrait of a crime syndicate." Siskel replied, "He makes moral stands. He makes films about sinners. That's so refreshing in an artful, beautiful way." Number 3, Hoop Dreams, 1994. Steve James's Hoop Dreams, 1994, is an extraordinary documentary about 2 inner-city kids in Chicago, William Gates and Arthur Agee, for whom basketball is one of the only ways out of poverty. It could qualify as the great American documentary. For 3 hours, Hoop Dreams followed them and their families in a way that makes you think about life. How many other players did James look at? Would Agee or Gates become the next Michael Jordan, or is it just enough to dream? Ebert said simply, "A film like Hoop Dreams is what the movies are for." By the end of the decade, Siskel was gone, but Ebert voted it the best movie of the 1990s, fiction or nonfiction. In 2013, director James was hired to direct the documentary on Ebert, Life Itself. Number 2, Raging Bull, 1980. This masterpiece, shot in black and white, and based on the true story of Jake LaMotta, was a move in a more respectable direction from Martin Scorsese's more personal, more streetwise films. It even came complete with the hype that star Robert De Niro had gained some 60 pounds to play the older version of LaMotta. This is commonplace today among actors, but back then it was a novelty, and it impressed everyone. Yet Raging Bull is hardly a sellout. It crackles with ferocious passion and hardly blinks an eye at the kind of violence that self-loathing can inspire. De Niro won an Oscar for Best Actor, as did editor Thelma Schoonmaker for her extraordinary boxing sequences, cut to the rhythm of the reporter's flashbulbs. Actors Joe Pesci as LaMotta's brother and Kathy Moriarty as his young blonde bride were also nominated. The film received 8 nominations in all, including Best Picture and Best Director, but lost to Ordinary People. It would be number 1 on this list, but for a curious anomaly. Ebert ranked it number 2 on his top 10 list for that year, second to The Black Stallion, though he later admitted his mistake. Of course, Raging Bull was a better film than The Black Stallion, and 9 years later, he chose Raging Bull as the best of the decade, as did Siskel. Meanwhile, Siskel had this to say, Raging Bull suggests that if you are looking for the source of evil in the world, you don't have to look any further than yourself. It's inside you or it isn't, and it comes out or it doesn't. Number 1. The Godfather, 1972. No question. Francis Ford Coppola's. The Godfather is like the Citizen Kane of the second half of the 20th century. It's virtually ageless, and it feels fresh each time you see it, no matter how many times you've seen it. Siskel chose it as one of his favorite movies of all time, and Ebert frequently mentioned it as one of the great movies. I want to point out how cleverly Coppola structures his film to create sympathy for his heroes. Ebert said, in his Great Movies of 1997, hearing the sadness and nostalgia of the movie's main theme, I realized what the music was telling us. Things would have turned out better if we had only listened to The Godfather.